Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, Digging into the Data, How COVID-19 and Remote Work Impacted Procurement. Today's webinar is being brought to you courtesy of Bonfire. For those of you who have attended NIGP webinars in the past, you know that from time to time we ask someone from outside NIGP to provide their expertise and unique insight into an important issue we want to highlight to our audience. Across the years, those experts have represented both the public and private sectors, academia, and the nonprofit communities. All webinar content is presented strictly for educational purposes only and is not intended to be an endorsement of our speaker's organization, products, or services. Today's webinar is being presented by Omar Saleme. As the Executive Director of Customer Success at Bonfire, Omar focuses on ensuring user success for all Bonfire clients, including onboarding, training, UI and UX analysis. He is passionate about enabling procurement professionals to be more effective and successful in their roles, including speaking at conferences and user groups about the importance of user-friendly software. Omar enjoys creating thought leadership content about user success and software adoption. If at any time during the webinar you need technical assistance, please let us know in the Q&A box. During the presentation, you may submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. Omar, would you like to go and get us started?
Yes, thank you so much. All right, well, I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay. And thank you so much for joining. I've been keeping an eye on the messages coming in. We have people from all over the place. There's actually a few familiar names, whether customers or people I've run into at the NIGP conference last summer. So I'm glad you were able to join us. Yeah, so today we're going to be, as the name suggests here, digging into the data, specifically related to this COVID pandemic and the remote work nature that we saw ourselves more or less being forced into, and how that impacted procurement teams and procurement projects. So I hope you find this data insightful, and I'm looking forward to having some time to discuss and answer some of your questions towards the end. So the introduction already happened. I've been working with procurement teams for 7 years, initially working hand in hand with them in modernizing or digitizing their procurement process. I work directly with over 100 organizations, and since I've been leading the team here that basically takes a procurement team from a paper world to a digital world. So needless to say, we've had tons of experience doing this, and this data is actually coming from both our clients' usage of the platform as well as surveys that we've conducted over the past couple of months as the pandemic took hold. All right, so thought we'd be starting with a quick agenda. And there's basically three major acts, if you will, for today's presentation. We're gonna look at, first of all, why it's important to review the lessons we've learned from COVID-19 and how those lessons might be applicable beyond the pandemic. And the second act is going to be looking at COVID-19's impact on procurement teams, specifically on the categories or projects that were being run. And we're going to look as well at vendor competition, how that's been affected. And then the third act is going to be on remote work and how that impacted procurement teams. Namely, how have you adjusted your process now that a lot of teams had to go remote, basically on a day's notice? And how has the consensus from those kind of RFPs that you have with the evaluation committee members, has it been affected by this? And we're gonna have a really interesting look under the hood, so to speak, at what happens for evaluation committee members nowadays. Again, that they're working from home, how are they completing their evaluations? And we're looking at some interesting trends that we're able to see already. So that's the agenda. So, today just to be a little bit more specific, we're going to be looking at a data source from both our user database as well as survey data to give you a better idea of how procurement was affected by COVID-19. And again, for many, how that transitioned to remote work. And there's no question that public procurement was majorly disrupted by the impact of COVID. As provincial or state or local government, schools, public healthcare institutions responded to COVID, procurement teams have been working around the clock to ensure emergency procurements continue to happen quickly and compliantly, with an emphasis on compliantly here. And so the role of the procurement teams was already challenging, you know, and with the added pressure to deliver results faster than ever before amidst economic uncertainty and nationwide emergency supply shortages, it truly has never been more difficult for procurement professionals to do their jobs. It's kind of a double whammy. And in the middle of all of this, many procurement teams have had to adjust to a new reality of working from home as a function that tends to still rely heavily on paper-based vendor submissions and evaluation scorecards, maybe in Excel. This was not an easy task to have that transition happen, especially so suddenly. And now, as many public offices are opening back up and people are returning to work, you know, the findings from this data might feel like it's no longer relevant. So we'll be looking at data mostly for March and April, but with the ever evolving nature of the global pandemic, and I hope we don't see another one in our lifetime, the 2 months can really feel like a really, really long time. And so whether things may feel like they're finally starting to return to quote unquote business as usual, or you know, you're still in the thick of working on COVID related projects while working from home, it's important that we pause and understand the lessons learned. You know, COVID-19 felt like such a unique disruption to business continuity, and it can be tempting to fall into the trap that this was once in a lifetime disruption. But the reality is that, you know, just as I'm sure no one here saw a global pandemic impacting our day-to-day lives the way it did, who knows how business continuity or agency may be disrupted again in the future. You know, it could be the resurgence of COVID-19 or something else entirely, natural disasters, wildfires, etc. So we can think of this as kind of a crash course into how to ensure that business continuity takes place, you know, and given the challenge that we'll surely have over the next few years. And one of the things I think that's really unique about COVID is that the role of procurement was brought to the surface. You know, all of a sudden everybody was talking about shortages and supply and ventilators and masks. And so, you know, procurement plays such a vital role in any crisis. And it's critical that your processes are prepared to handle any future disruption that comes your way. And that's why it's so important that we reflect on how procurement teams responded to the initial disruption of COVID-19 so we can learn and take those lessons to the future. So hopefully that sets a bit of a background for why this is a really important topic to discuss. And it's not just a thing that is, you know, going to come and go. This is something that we have to deal with, or at least some of the lessons from which we can take on with us. Okay, so why are we able to talk about this? So at Bonfire, we work with hundreds of public agencies across North America, you know, in industries spanning municipalities, K-12, higher education, public healthcare, utilities, etc. And over the past 8 years, when we've existed as a company, there has been over 40,000 competitive events that have been run through our strategic sourcing software. And we actually just released a new feature in our sourcing suite that surfaces benchmarks and templates from this library of competitive events so that Bonfire clients can use this data to inform their own bids and RFPs and set expectations for things like timelines, vendor competition to their stakeholders. And the reason why we've released this feature is because we believe in the power of data-driven procurement decisions. You know, so often procurement teams operate in their own silos away from the rest of the organization. That's very unfortunate because successful bids and RFPs really depend on collaboration, alignment, and an acute understanding of each department's needs. And this data can hopefully help bridge the gap between procurement teams and the rest of your organization. You know, procurement is already expected to be a jack of all trades and have knowledge in everything from IT to facilities management, to construction, to specialized equipment. And when you have access to procurement data, like some of the data we're going over today, it enables you to know a little bit about, again, a lot of things such that, you know, you can provide data-driven guidance to your stakeholders and add value at every interaction. So we've seen from our own clients' experiences that stakeholders often want to see results as fast as possible, but are hesitant to put their trust in your process. And when you're able to demonstrate that you're following industry best practices and lessons learned from the data, it establishes a lot more trust between you and your stakeholders. And that's really, really important. Okay, so before we dig into our findings on how COVID-19 affected procurement teams across North America, we just wanted to run a quick poll to do a bit of a temperature check on the experiences of those attending the call today. So we wanted to know, how have your procurement processes been disrupted because of COVID-19? Have you formed a team dedicated to dealing with the emergency response? Have you transitioned to working from home completely, or maybe just on a rotating basis? Have you adopted new technologies such as video conferencing, or procurement software to deal with these disruptions? Did you need to put a pause on purchasing that wasn't related to the emergency? Or do you believe that your agency hasn't been impacted at all? You can select as many as apply to your response. And if there's something that we're missing, that was a big change to your procurement process and team, and a way you had to adapt, please tell us in the comments or in the chat. We certainly haven't encapsulated all the things that could have happened, and we want to learn again from you in terms of what you've been able to see. So the poll is already up here, so we'll just kind of hold maybe a little bit until additional responses come in, and then we're going to reveal the results to everyone.
Yeah, we'll keep this up for about another 5 seconds.
And just as we wait here, we will be addressing a lot of these challenges that are listed here in today's webinar, and giving you a glimpse into how your peers have adapted to these changes, and so, yeah, maybe when we have the results, we'll talk about them.
And here are the results, Omar.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'll read them out for you here. 44% of those who voted formed a team dedicated to dealing with emergency response. 85% have transitioned to working remotely part-time or full-time since March. That's a really revealing statistic. 62% have adopted new technologies. 34% have put a pause on a lot of existing bids or RFPs. And it's interesting, 2% have not been impacted by COVID-19. That lines up exactly with what we've seen actually in our own polling earlier. So needless to say, this will be very valuable, hopefully, to you, and will resonate with you in terms of what we've been able to see across the board. Okay, so I'm going to close the polls here and transition into kind of our first data takeaway. So first off, let's take a look at what types of competitive events are being run right now. Are there more RFPs or non-RFPs? And when I say non-RFP, I mean, price-driven bids or invitational projects on the market right now. And so when comparing the average number of projects being run now compared to this time last year, it comes as no surprise, and again, most people have alluded to this already, that both RFPs and bids have decreased significantly. Organizations are now running on average 26% fewer RFP projects and 25% fewer bids than the same time last year. So the ratio to RFPs and bids on the market has remained pretty much the same. Of course, just because there are fewer competitive events run in the season doesn't mean that procurement teams are any less busy. As you've likely experienced during COVID and the related economic uncertainty that has come with this disruption, most non-emergency bids and RFPs were put on hold. And procurement teams reallocated much of their time and resources. Again, as we saw, 62% of those who voted can allude to this. They put more time and resources towards emergency projects. And at Bonfire, we've seen our clients focusing their attention on procuring, like hand sanitizing stations at schools, hazardous environment, clothing for county frontline workers, printing equipment for the delivery of K-12 math modules. And so procurement teams are doing what they can to streamline these projects and get emergency procurements to the front lines quickly and compliantly. The average RFP project involves 15% fewer evaluators and 51% fewer evaluation advisors or consultants compared to this time last year. And the average bid project is now showing 6% fewer evaluators and 50% or 49% fewer evaluation advisors or consultants. So the average number of pages per submission has also gone from 207 pages to 155. That's a 25% decrease. And I think, you know, that maybe points to the nature of the quickness that submissions had to come in and the closing times being very closely, you know, being very tight such that we can get these things procured very quickly. So this is kind of translating even on the submission side of things. And if there's one thing we can take away from this data, it's that having the capabilities to run quick and compliant bids and RFPs is more important than ever. You know, whether you're running with a slimmed down evaluation team, you're reducing your requested documents, or you're investing in bidding software that will help you draft and publish bids instantly, you know, it's clear that agencies that aren't adapting their processes to get solicitations to market as fast can't get ahead of the supply shortages and are less agile to meet the needs of their constituents. So that's kind of the first key takeaway. Now we're going to shift at what categories of projects were being run. And in the Bonfire platform, we categorize bids and RFPs at the highest level by construction, facilities management, IT and software, products, professional services, and specialized equipment. So those are like the top level categorizations. Unsurprisingly, considering most organizations are cutting down on the projects they're running by about 25%, when looking at the breakdown of project volumes per category, there's a decrease in volume in all categories. You know, products followed by IT and software saw the most significant decrease. And a closer look at these specific categories under these primary categories, however, gives a better look into exactly how procurement teams are pivoting due to this crisis. So let's look at that. So we're seeing public agencies run 102% more specialized equipment projects in the quote unquote other category, which essentially captures everything that is not medical, laboratory, or sport and recreation. 6% more healthcare services projects are being run. That makes a lot of sense. And then this one is a surprising one. Sports and recreational equipment saw a whopping 251% bump in projects run. At first glance, we thought, okay, this doesn't make any sense since for the most part, all sports and recreational activities are on pause right now. But with schools and recreational facilities being closed down right now, we wondered if some of the public agencies might be redirecting some of their spend to create programs that engage, you know, kids and youth, especially those who might be low income or at risk, or who are dependent on school and recreation facilities. So if your agency is running any types of sports and recreational competitive events right now, why don't you let us know in the chat? We'd love to hear and better understand, you know, where the spike in projects is coming from. As for bid projects, 6%, we've seen an increase in clothing projects being run. And I think this is maybe similar to the hazardous environment clothing for county frontline worker project that we mentioned earlier. Engineering consulting and environmental consulting has also seen a significant increase in project volumes, 35 and 51% respectively. This may be because organizations are focusing on infrastructure projects at this time, or maybe the rise corresponds with new medical facilities that are being built to the crisis. Certainly the city that I was in, there was kind of makeshift hospitals that were, or old hotels that were being re-equipped with medical equipment to kind of prepare for the influx of patients. And so those are kind of the trends. Interesting to see that, you know, while categorically, you know, we saw a reduction, there are, you know, subcategories that definitely saw an increase to respond to COVID. Okay, so let's dig into the data on IT and software projects. All the subcategories but one saw a significant cut in competitive events. Audiovisual equipment and supply saw a 32% decrease in project volumes. Electronics saw a 42% decrease. You know, this is something like IT equipment for networking, these projects are put on hold. There's no IT staff to actually put them into motion. IT technology projects saw a 12% decrease, and software products saw a 46% decrease. And that's important here because we're going to talk about this a little bit more. So software saw a 46% decrease. The last subcategory, telecommunications, saw a 37% increase in project volumes. These types of projects may include supporting internet connectivity for employees working from home or implementing systems like Zoom or Skype to support virtual meetings. What's interesting about this data is it highlights the clash of two opposing ideas that COVID-19 has really highlighted. IT and software are often viewed by public organizations as quote unquote nice to have, which accounts for why these projects are often the first to get cut in times of economic instability. At the same time, as many organizations have had to make the jump to remote work, software services that enable remote work communication, like Zoom, like Slack, have become critical to ensuring business continuity. So the need to virtualize back office business processes like procurement that have traditionally relied on maybe paper or legacy systems, has also been brought into focus in public agencies across North America at this time. It'll be interesting to see if this mindset towards IT and software as a business necessity, rather than just an expendable cost, will continue over the coming months. That's an attitude shift that we've certainly started to see ourselves, a Bonfire, but it'll be interesting to see again if it persists. Those who have invested in, maybe the ones on the call today from academia or K-12 in remote, educational software might have had a much easier time transitioning, to remote teaching. And so that's what we mean by that, this dynamic of what could have been a nice to have in a time of like a global pandemic, all of a sudden became a necessity, and it happened overnight. So to hit this point even further, note that the data from the previous slide was across all public industries. So when we single out just education and municipalities, we see how these industries in particular are investing in telecom services right now. So many K-12 education institutions brought learning online in March and April, resulting in a 219% increase in telecom bids and RFPs run compared to Jan and Feb of this year. So this is like just a 2-month difference. Municipalities similarly saw a 118% increase in telecom services, likely to adjust again to this new remote work reality. The big question here is, are a lot of these changes here to stay? Will schools continue to expand their online education offering due to lessons learned in the season? When everyone is back in the office, will online communication tools be abandoned? These are really good questions. Actually, we might have an inkling into how this could shape out after COVID. So in a previous webinar that we ran over at Bonfire, all about procurement and remote work, this happened about a month ago. I was talking to Paul Brennan, who is the director of purchasing for the County of Rockland in New York, which was per capita at the time, one of the highest or most hit counties in the United States in terms of COVID cases. And he predicts that a lot of the software adoption is likely here to stay. The county government, for them, is split across 2 campuses, which is about a 15-minute drive from each other. He noted that there was a lot of wasted time spent driving back and forth between campuses for meetings. And now that the crisis has pushed the use of virtual tools at his agency, he believes that they're going to stick around even as people start returning back to the office. So this kind of forcing function that we had with COVID has opened up our eyes to say, you know what, maybe it's not necessary to spend half an hour on a return trip just to attend an hour meeting. And I can just do the same thing from my office and use that hour towards, the 100 things I still have left to do. As your agency's mindset, shifts to seeing IT and software as business critical rather than an expendable cost, this could actually present a really unique opportunity for procurement teams like yours to advocate for the digital tools that will future-proof your process and prepare them for any future disruption to business continuity. And likely, if you're on the call today, you're an early adopter, you're one who likes to kind of learn and keep up with the latest trends. And I know for sure that we've heard this over and over again. People are interested in bringing, say, procurement online and digitizing it, but there's often no appetite or no budget allocated to it. But again, with COVID now, showing the intersection between the criticalness of the procurement function and the fragility of the business continuity that we could have if we're doing everything offline, those two things are now creating a really good opportunity for you. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the presentation today. Okay, so next up, we dug into how vendor competition has been affected during COVID-19. So when comparing the data from Jan and Feb of this year versus mid-March to end of April, we see that the average volume of proposals per project has increased slightly from 3.9 to 4.1 submissions per project. So in other words, although fewer projects are being run, there's an average 5% more vendor competition on those projects. In March and April, as many North American states and provinces put a hold on non-essential business and public organizations significantly reduced their open bids, suppliers may have had fewer options on solicitations to bid on. At the same time, the climate of economic uncertainty may have motivated suppliers to seek additional business, accounting for the increased vendor competition. As the current economic climate continues to negatively impact suppliers, possibly because of personnel scale downs or supply shortages, it will be interesting to see if this trend continues through 2020, or if we will see a vendor competition start to decrease again. And keep in mind, this increase, we're mainly seeing it again on those projects that saw also the highest, increase in frequency versus the ones where we saw a major decrease. So the telecom projects and software projects that we talked about earlier. So procurement teams are also doing their part in increasing vendor competition to ensure best value decisions are being made, even in this time of supply shortages and quick project timelines. So another speaker in the webinar I mentioned earlier, Jay Ayers, who is the director of group purchasing organization at St. Joseph's Health System, was pretty innovative in his approach to increasing vendor competition while also shortening the project cycle times. Keep in mind, because he was in the healthcare side, he wanted to get the equipment quickly. So what his team did is exported previous RFP responses from Bonfire that included information on lead times, pricing, warranty, services, and training into a spreadsheet. And rather than having the vendors start from scratch with their submissions, Jay's team sent them the spreadsheet that they had filled out in the past and confirmed their permission to proceed with including their information in a future competitive event. So basically they said, here's what you've submitted maybe 6 months ago. Does all this information still hold true? And if it does, you can not spend another 2 weeks crafting together a response, just simply confirm and re-upload this file, and that shortened the cycle length of the procurement by at least a couple of weeks. And so they had a lot of success with that approach and received a lot of really positive vendor feedback, because again, the vendors who were high in demand were seeing a lot of requests coming their way. And to the degree that they can respond quickly, that was also important for the supplier community as well. So we looked at how COVID-19 in general has impacted procurement teams. Before we transition into looking at how remote work specifically has impacted procurement teams, we wanted to hear from you and your experience. Are you currently working from home? Maybe you've been working from home consistently since mid-March. I know that we here at Bonfire have been working from home since March 13th. Maybe your agency is generally working from home, but you've had to go in periodically, maybe to pick up vendor submissions that have been mailed in or something along those lines. Or maybe you were working from home, but as shelter-in-place orders have begun to be lifted across North America, now you're back in the office. And again, we saw 2% who were completely unaffected, and maybe this will be the case here too, where, you know, COVID kind of like nothing didn't even happen to you, which is very positive. But again, I'll be curious to see what the results from this poll show, and we'll talk about it quickly before contrasting to what we've seen on our customer side.
Yes, we'll give everybody about 5 more seconds to get their response in. And Omar, here are the results.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So let me go through the responses here again. 53% have said, I have been working from home consistently for the past couple of months. So that's over half who have been trying to do their procurement remotely. 22% have said, I have been working from home, but I go into the office periodically. 12%, I was working from home, but now I'm back in the office. And 12% have said they haven't stopped working in the office. So basically 78% have been impacted. And let me do the math here quickly. 75%, so 3/4, have actually been like working from home predominantly over the last couple of months. This is really revealing. And so I'm going to show you what the results look like from our client base, and they're actually very similar. On the screen right now, you see the results from that survey that we talked about, that we did about a month ago on April 29th. Of course, this isn't a one-to-one comparison since we're surveying a different group of people today, but it's interesting to see how the results, you know, some of them have changed, some of them have actually stayed the same since April. So in this survey that we did back then, we found that 77% of procurement professionals have been working from home consistently for the past several weeks, almost bang on what we saw here today. 19% have been going to the office periodically. 2% were working from home and had returned to the office, and another 2% had not stopped working from the office at all. So the majority of procurement teams that we had surveyed, you know, had to make that adjustment from working from home. And again, these numbers very much line up with the survey that we did, I guess, a month later, or a month and a half later today. So we've said before, you know, procurement plays a critical role in any crisis. So if there's one department that can't afford to slow down in times like these, it is procurement. On the other hand, procurement is probably one of the departments that is least optimized for remote work. And if you rely especially on hard copy vendor submissions, now there's no one in the office to receive those shipments. You know, getting documents to evaluators under the best circumstance when they're in the same building as yourself, or maybe the building nearby, was already tough as it is, but now you potentially have to drive it to their homes. So it's definitely a logistical challenge that we didn't have to deal with a couple of months ago. And so procurement had to make some big changes to get remote work ready, all while allocating time and resources to make procurement that address the constituents' needs during the global health crisis. It's definitely a double whammy that you've had to kind of weather. And we definitely feel for you and appreciate the work that everybody has done. Okay, so given that change, how have procurement teams adjusted processes that previously depended on paper or just being there in person? So in that survey that I mentioned earlier for procurement professionals, we found that the majority of procurement teams, about 70%, have adjusted their process to run virtual processes or meetings. So things like consensus meetings, virtual bid openings, those were kind of the most popular meetings that all of a sudden went virtual. And as of April 29th, 17% had not yet adapted their process or processes to run virtually, but were planning on doing so. And so the most popular video conferencing app, and that was also part of the survey, was Zoom. So the one we're using right now. And 41% of survey participants were saying that their organization had adopted it. And whether it's Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Skype, or an alternative application, all procurement professionals surveyed were using a video conferencing application of some type to collaborate and ensure competitive events are running on time, on budget, and meeting all parties' expectations. So clearly, platforms like video conferencing are important to procurement teams right now, but what about platforms specifically dedicated to digitizing your procurement process? So when we asked again, in the same survey I mentioned earlier, the survey respondents, if they consider digital procurement platforms to be an important pillar of their business continuity plans, 90% of procurement professionals said they are currently using a platform or looking to implement a digital solution. That number has never been so high in the 7 years I've been in the business dealing with procurement people. And again, it's a sudden realization because of being forced to work from home. And as that sentiment is here to stay, 73% of respondents said COVID's effects have caused their organization to realize that digital procurement is something to be prioritized in the future. So as we've mentioned before, with telecom services getting such a boost in RFPs during COVID, there seems to be a shifting mentality towards the importance of online tools, especially during times of crisis. Procurement teams like yours have a unique opportunity to leverage the shifting mentality and advocate for digital tools that have typically been seen as a nice to have rather than a necessity. And so that, business case that you would have to develop now takes on a whole new dimension. It's no longer, it makes my team more efficient, maybe more compliant. Now it's like, this is, a necessary thing for our constituents, whether it be the students, patients, or citizens in our municipalities. So now that has this transition to remote work and potentially the adoption of new tools like video conferencing and procurement software affected something like evaluation team consensus and alignment. How has it affected it? Which is so crucial to ensuring best value procurement. As teams have moved from, again, these in-person consensus meetings to online virtual meetings or digital evaluation scorecards instead of paper or spreadsheet-based scorecards, how has that affected the collaboration among evaluation committee members? And so to better understand how collaboration and consensus and evaluation teams have been affected by COVID-19 combined with remote work, we took a look at individual evaluator scores and how much they differed or aligned from each other in their evaluation group. So we measured this by calculating the standard deviation of user scores. Now, for those who don't know or maybe need a refresher from your last statistics class, standard deviation essentially refers to how much variation there is in data, in this case, scoring data. So in this example, a low standard deviation means there's little variation in how evaluators scored on different criteria, which means there's a lot of consensus and alignment. So low standard deviation, there's high alignment. Alternatively, high standard deviation means there's a lot of variation in the scoring data, which means that there's less consensus and alignment between the evaluation committee members. Now, as you can see at the bottom of this graph, evaluation scores with a low standard deviation of 0 to say 0.1 is considered to have more consensus, and evaluation scores with a high standard deviation of say 0.5 to 0.6 is considered to have low consensus. And the y-axis is basically the count of how many times the standard deviation occurred. The blue bars represent 2019 frequency, and the orange bars represent 2020. Okay, so that's kind of the explanation of what we're looking at here in the graph. So let's look at the volume of projects that have a standard deviation specifically of 0.2 or more. So it's basically here and higher, which would be considered, say, moderate to poor alignment. As we can see, the orange bars representing 2020 are all taller than the blue bars representing 2019, meaning there was more frequency of standard deviation that would have indicated moderate to poor consensus. From that, we can conclude that COVID-19 and the transition to remote work have actually negatively impacted evaluator alignment. Now, we're not advocating that all evaluators will always be in alignment. Part of the procurement process is surfacing, these individual interpretations of the vendor documentation. But there are some additional, column risks that get introduced when there's a higher degree of misalignment. And so we'll talk about that in a bit. But for now, there's a few possible catalysts for this dip in consensus. Now, I don't know if listeners on the call today are experiencing this, but Zoom fatigue is a real thing. In fact, a lot of our team here at Bonfire have scaled back the number of meetings on any given day because people are simply getting a little fatigued of jumping on video conference meetings and having these back-to-back meetings all virtually. So consciously or unconsciously, Zoom fatigue may be causing a reduction in bid and RFP consensus meetings, or kind of like ad hoc discussions that would have led to that kind of consensus forming, which could account for this reduced alignment in evaluator scores we're seeing. And for teams that don't use any type of collaboration sourcing software and really depend on in-person meetings for alignment, a reduction in meetings likely has an even larger impact on evaluator alignment. Because keep in mind, this data is coming from those who have digitized their evaluation process. So as consensus among evaluation committee members declines amidst COVID and remote work, scoring is becoming more divergent. That's one conclusion. And this puts more pressure on procurement teams to ensure that their award decision is defensible. That's what I meant by that risk earlier. So this is why it's important to invest in digital tools in procurement, besides including tools that can help you optimize collaboration and the distribution of the documents among your evaluation committee members. These online procurement platforms can more accurately ensure complete audit trails, enable defensible awards, enforce comments to be put against scores. So even when remote work is impacting the evaluation committee members, we're still getting all of the, the background reasons that justify why the score is the way it is. And again, divergence in opinion is okay as long as it's supported and defensible in, say, a bid protest scenario. Your agency, has likely never been more open to investing in software solutions, and the importance of strategic procurement has never been more clear. To me, now is the time to advocate for the tools that will drive seamless collaboration and communication. And strategic sourcing software can definitely help in this regard. It can enable the connection and collaboration between procurement and your colleagues by moving time-consuming things like consensus meetings online. Again, help you make more defensible decisions. And there are going to be purpose-built tools that allow for this collaboration and to get alignment among your stakeholders towards a common goal and to drive that best value decision that we're all after. So now we're shifting some gear here. And if you're working from home, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that your workday habits and routines have been disrupted. Besides a drop in consensus, how has the transition to remote work impacted project stakeholders? After all, evaluation groups are essential to ensuring the best value in any competitive event and that we're selecting, the best vendor for the purpose of the procurement. But they're also a group that may put evaluator responsibilities like consensus meetings, submission evaluations, low on their priority list to focus on their full-time day-to-day responsibilities. Again, this is kind of a side project that they have to do this evaluation. So has remote work impacted something like the time of day when evaluators are completing their evaluations? Short answer is yes, but let's dig into it. In this graph on the screen, we're comparing the timestamp of when people are entering the scores into Bonfire. So every time our score is recorded, we know exactly when that happened. Along the bottom axis is the time of day across every day of the week, starting at Sunday on the left and ending with Saturday on the right. The red line indicates when evaluation scores were being inputted in January and Feb of this year. Blue bars indicate the percentage of evaluation completed during the workday, so 8 to 5, of March and April of this year. Yellow indicates a percentage of evaluations or scores that were completed outside of office hours. So yellow is outside of office hours of these 2 months, April and March, and blue is within office hours within those months, and the red line shows what it was like in the past, earlier in the year. So when comparing the Jan-Feb to March-April, we see a significantly higher percentage of evaluation activity performed during non-office hours. Notably, the yellow bars see an uptick in the start of every workday, which means more evaluation activity has been happening during morning hours between 6 and 8 a.m. since the start of remote work. This is likely because there's no longer a morning commute into the office. Everybody gained maybe an extra half hour to an hour to which they can put towards those side projects like an evaluation. During COVID, more evaluations are also happening on weekends, especially Sundays. And that comes at no surprise considering that so many people, including myself, who are working from home these days seem to be experiencing a breakdown of the barrier between work life and home life. So to me, it's just very fascinating to see how evaluators have shifted attitudes towards scoring, especially in a time when they're not even in the office. And again, we're seeing an uptick, a more distributed time in which they are doing their scoring. And as you can see here, Sunday went from almost no scores being entered to significantly more, especially around noon. And we also joke here in that, lunch hour is no longer what it used to be. Like you look at a typical Tuesday, we're seeing a lot more scores in a typical lunch hour than we used to before COVID. Again, the routine has all been changed for everybody. It's just fascinating to be able to see this in the data set. So we can see this though even more clearly in this graph, comparing the uptick in after hours evaluations in Jan and Feb to March and April of this year. Evaluators are decreasingly completing their evaluation during work hours and increasingly completing them outside of work hours. With so many people across North America juggling family and other responsibilities in addition to work during the day, it makes sense that this is a trend that we're seeing. So as you're considering tools and adjustments to make your procurement process more conducive for collaboration, especially online collaboration, it's important to keep in mind solutions that are user-friendly and engaging to your peers, so that evaluations aren't something they're leaving to the last minute, that they're kind of putting off because they don't enjoy doing it. It's also important to prioritize solutions that will offer flexibility to complete evaluations around other responsibilities and priorities that your evaluators are balancing now. I mean, the interesting thing that we saw here too is in the past, anecdotally, we'd hear stories of, if an evaluator is a busy, executive in the municipality, say, they're probably doing it on their train ride, or it could be, while they're waiting for a flight or something like that. And just having the ability to be productive in those times in which you typically are just waiting around is something that I think points to the efficacy of these digital tools and how they can help us get our procurement cycle to be shortened. Okay, well, so that wraps up our deep dive into the data on how COVID-19 and remote work have impacted the procurement teams. We hope that it was informative as you reflected on how your agency's response to the crisis compares to your peers' experience, and that these lessons learned will help you as you continue to prepare your own processes for any future disruption to business continuity. As you can see on the slide here, the key takeaways from today's presentation include the fact that running fast and compliant bids and RFPs is more important than ever before, as public agencies are significantly cutting back on project volume, number of evaluators per project, and number of required proposal documents. We need to make sure that we're able to run the things that we need in a really fast and a compliant method. Second, public agencies are investing in communication software at a level we've never seen before, particularly municipalities and educational institutions. Third, although vendor competition is on the rise right now, procurement teams cannot get complacent when it comes to engaging vendors as economic uncertainty and supply shortages make the future of vendor competitions uncertain. We also saw that almost all procurement teams are investing in technologies like video conferencing and e-sourcing solutions. We saw that remote work has negatively impacted evaluator consensus and engagement, which means that procurement teams need to seriously look at solutions that will positively impact collaboration and alignment. In my opinion, the biggest takeaway that ties all of these findings together is the fact that public organizations have never been more open to investment in communication technology. And as a procurement professional, now is the time to advocate for the tools that will not only make your processes easier and more efficient and compliant, but will ensure procurement is prepared for any future emergency. You know, the world has definitely changed since a couple of months ago. And the actions that you take now to capitalize on these changing attitudes towards technology and the newfound appreciation for procurement's role as a strategic advisor, as a critical function, you know, will define you for the years to come. There's definitely an opportunity now. So either you can make minor tweaks to bring your submission and bid openings online, which again is a big step in helping you modernize, or you can go beyond just the simple digitization and invest in the tools that will address the challenges you're facing right now in project planning, collaboration, evaluation scoring, and vendor competition. But the key is there's an opportunity to capitalize on this now while people understand the importance of the function and are willing to fund it. And so this wraps up our meeting today. I'm going to be sticking around to see any of the Q&A. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions and read any of your comments as well throughout.
Thanks, Omar. So our first question came early on, and I believe it came in around when you were presenting on slide 8. And Sonia would like to know where the information was pulled from for this graph.
Yeah, let me put that into focus for us here. Yeah, this information came directly from the projects that were run in Bonfire. And so all of our clients are using our digital platform to post. And part of what we do is we actually categorize these projects. And basically, we're able to compare any period of time versus another period of time in terms of how these kind of trends have changed for these categories. So this came from our client base. And just to kind of give you an idea, you know, what that entails, we're, I would say, evenly spread among the MASH sector. So municipalities, academia, school districts, and healthcare. Also a lot of special districts like water districts, utilities, etc. And it really spans the whole gamut from small organizations to really large organizations. And again, so that came directly from the projects that they run.
Thank you. And Rachel kind of has a statement. You asked about an increase in exercise equipment spending. Our city has spent money buying small pieces of equipment for employees to check out and use at home during this crisis.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. That was definitely a question that we had. Why are we seeing a change in that trend? And this is really insightful, and we'll definitely take it back to kind of inform why we're seeing that trend.
And Omar, have you known anybody to do a virtual site tour?
Yes, I mentioned the webinar that we held about a month ago. This was something just we did it for the client base, and we did hear that. So for construction projects, some organizations, municipalities namely, are taking contractors through a virtual tour. Another interesting story that we heard from Jay, who we talked about earlier today. So Jay buys medical equipment for 400 hospitals. And some of the equipment that they buy is actually made in Europe. And so they had, I think it was a supplier there, and they ran the entire demo, which they normally do in person. Like there's doctors and clinicians that fly to Europe to typically do these things. And they were able to have this really like streamlined presentation to take them through like an ultrasound machine, if I remember correctly. And that was another realization that Jay was mentioning, is we can actually save thousands of dollars and basically get the same effect of these on-site meetings by doing them virtually. So whether it's construction or things like for products like medical equipment, we've heard stories of people doing those virtually, yes.
Awesome. Can you elaborate on negatively impacted evaluations?
Yeah, and I think the wording may not be ideal here. When we mean negatively, working with so many procurement teams, we know there is some sensitivity sometimes to disagreements among evaluation committee members, because that could be a way to expose the decision, the award decision, and potentially leave the door open for a bid protest. So when we say negatively, that's what we kind of mean. And what we meant by that is, as we talked about earlier, there's just a divergence in the scores that were coming in. And so that leads to, again, more holes, so to speak, that people can poke at for a bid protest. And the fact that this is happening more so in a remote setting, because I think people collaborate less, they don't run into each other, that each person kind of forms their opinion in a true silo, that is causing this to happen. And we just want to make you aware that that might be something you want to focus on. And again, we're not advocating that everybody sees things exactly the same way. We're just advocating that when people do have differing opinions, that they're well documented. And that's all you kind of need to defend against your decision.
Thanks, Omar. And if you have any other questions, please input those in the Q&A box. How long does it typically take to get up and running on new procurement software?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, I would say up and running within 3 weeks is super reasonable. Training usually is about a week. It's a SaaS solution, so there's no installation costs or time. It just, we can spin up a portal relatively quickly. We actually opened up a COVID emergency response program when all of this happened. I couldn't help but see on LinkedIn all these posts by people just desperate to get masks and gowns for their municipalities. And internally, we kind of reflected on that. We said, what can we do to help? And so we opened up basically the platform to be used during that critical time when everybody was working from home. And we were able to onboard 50 plus organizations, again, in a matter of weeks, taking their whole procurement process from paper-based to digital in that time. And so it doesn't take a long time, and it's something that suppliers are also increasingly are used to and they actually prefer. But yeah, if you have any more questions, we can definitely take it offline.
What should I focus on if I'm trying to assess whether a particular sourcing software is right for me and my team?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, there's two elements to it. There's obviously the ease of use. You know, if you kind of assess, this is another webinar I actually did with NIGP. IT projects that have high success rates are usually because there's engagement in the process and in the software itself. So ease of use is something that is very important. I would say though, you want to look into the longer term, not just in the immediate term of I want to digitize my process. You want to look into what other aspects of, you know, the software that are being looked into in the future. So specifically, just to be ultra specific, we like to focus at Bonfire on the data aspect. So these insights that we showed you earlier today and some of the features that we're building are very much assuming that, hey, you want to digitize your process. We've done that 500 times. It's really easy. But how do we elevate the procurement team to be very strategic and come to the table with data and insights at the start of a project is kind of where we see things are heading. So I would say don't focus on just a checklist of features. Look into, you know, the mindset of the software company and where they want to head in terms of the technology, because it is going to be a commitment of say 3 to 5 years, and you want to kind of think of it in the longer term. So ease of use is important, I would say. and then second, the vision for where that's all going.
And Marilyn would like to know what the ranges are in costs.
Yeah, I mean, that one is a tough question to answer because it's dependent on how much of the process you want to digitize and how many procurement professionals you have working at your organization. But it can be as low as starting at say 7,500 and it goes up from there. But it's highly dependent on those things. And large organizations could be 100 plus, like for many buyers, but most people end up in that, I would say 20 range. That's an annual cost.
How would you go about digitizing the bid proposal process within your state?
I mean, within the state, that's a tough one to answer just sort of generally. Now, the way we've done it is, it's very simple, right? First of all, we want to look at where you're posting your opportunities, and we'll basically provide you with a portal that allows you to do that. And that digitizes automatically the submission process. And it turns out once you have the submissions come in digitally, it becomes a distribution of documents internally to your evaluation committee members. So you kind of get that automatically. So then it becomes building those scorecards and distributing them to your evaluation committee members. And then automatically the system will collect all those scores for you and help you run these consensus meetings. And then it goes into contract management and vendor performance management. So I would say the easiest thing to do is usually when people start with Bonfire, we say, okay, give us a list of your supplier that you've dealt with in the past, maybe out of your ERP. We actually invite them to sign up for free in the platform. And most of the time they've already used us in the past, so they don't have to actually sign up. And then once they're in, everything is just simple for them because they get notified when a project is up. They upload their files, like they're uploading an attachment to an email, and they press submit, and that kind of portion of it is done. On the evaluation committee members, it's light, easy to use. There's no training needed. It just happens automatically for them. And so I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's actually really easy to do. And it's been done hundreds of times successfully. So we have a lot of confidence that we're able to do it with any organization.
Great. And what was the most surprising discovery you made when looking at this data?
Well, it was definitely the rise in the telecom. I mean, you could have kind of maybe predicted that, but there's such a steep rise in those particular categories, and definitely the athletic equipment that we talked about earlier. Those ones we kind of had us scratching our heads in terms of like, what could be causing this? The other one that was interesting is seeing how people are working from home and doing their evaluations in what we called out of office hours. And seeing that rise was interesting. I wouldn't have predicted that.
All right, and those are all the questions we have. If we have any last minute questions, please place those in the Q&A box. Omar, did you have any last minute statements you'd like to make?
No, but I want to just thank everyone for sticking around and contributing to the conversation at the end. I want to thank you for doing what you do. Again, all of us have realized just how critical the procurement function is and how we rely on you, and you're kind of the soldiers behind that nobody sees. And so thank you for doing what you do and for participating and attending today.
Great, thanks, Omar. We have one last minute question. Are there any plans for follow-up training?
Yeah, I mean, Marilyn, if you get in touch with us, we have plenty of opportunities. We have plenty of webinars that we host on these types of topics, and as well as training. Please get in touch and I'll definitely connect you with the right people here.
Fantastic. I would like to thank Omar and Bonfire. Hope everyone enjoyed this webinar. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. A link containing the survey and a recording of this webinar will be emailed to everyone tomorrow. Thanks again and have a great day.